At 12:07 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the garage door opening. They thought I was asleep. They always thought I was asleep. But at 71, your ears learn to listen through walls, especially when you're no longer welcome in your own house. I didn't have time to sit up before the door to the basement creaked open. Footsteps. Heavy. Male. The smell of stale beer reached me before his voice. "Ma, get up." He didn't say, please. He hadn't in years. He was flanked by his wife, Dana, who didn't speak. She just held the flashlight under her chin like some villain in a child's ghost story. The shadows on her face made her look exactly like who she was. They didn't let me put on shoes. He grabbed me by the elbow, not cruelly, but not gently either, and pulled me up the stairs and through the back door, out into the night. I saw the kitchen lights glowing behind the curtains, the table I'd once picked out from a catalog when catalogs still came in the mail. They dragged me into the garage. I say dragged, not because I fought back. I didn't. My knees weren't what they used to be. I couldn't have resisted even if I'd wanted to. But I did not walk willingly. There was a chair in the center of the garage, old, wooden, paint peeling. My chair. From the porch. The one my husband built before his heart gave out one April morning, 15 years ago. They'd taken it and stuck it under the raw light bulb in the garage like a centerpiece for something ugly. "Sit," my son said. When I hesitated, Dana took a step forward. She held something in her hand. I couldn't see what, but the way she gripped it made my stomach knot. I sat. They tied my wrists to the arms of the chair. Yes, tied. With cords from the extension cables he kept in the tool chest. I looked at him. My son. The one I'd raised on canned soup and hand-sewn mittens. He couldn't meet my eyes. Then Dana pulled out the folder. "You're going to sign this," she said. She flipped it open. I saw the words, "General Power of Attorney," in bold print at the top. "You'll sign, or we'll make you wish you had," she added. Her voice didn't shake. It was cold, rehearsed. I didn't ask what they meant. The smell of gasoline answered for me. He'd poured it, not a lot, just enough to scare me. Just enough to prove that he was serious. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. They wanted fear. But fear is a young woman's weakness. At 71, what was left to take from me? I looked at the paper again. "You really think this will give you the house?" I asked. My voice was hoarse, but calm. I'd forgotten what calm felt like. Dana leaned in. Her perfume smelled like lilies. I used to love lilies. I hate them now. "You'll sign or burn?" she said again, slow and clear. That's when I started laughing. Not loudly, not maniacally. Just a low, tired laugh that came from somewhere deep. It startled them. Both of them. For a second, they looked less like villains and more like two teenagers caught in the act. "Why are you laughing?" my son asked. I looked at him and said the first honest sentence I'd spoken to him in years. "Because you think this house is still yours." He blinked. "I mean, it's not technically, until you sign—" "No," I interrupted. "You don't understand. It hasn't been yours since Monday." That's when I saw it. The first crack in his face, a flicker of something between confusion and fear. Dana narrowed her eyes. "What are you talking about?" I tilted my chin up. "I signed it over already, but not to you." He stepped closer. "To who?" I smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The kind that holds 17 years of silence and one long, boiling Sunday afternoon at the lawyer's office. "To myself." And then the sirens began. They hadn't noticed the panic button I'd duct taped under the old porch chair. They hadn't noticed I was still wearing my emergency pendant under my nightgown, the one they thought I was too senile to remember to press. But I had pressed it. Right before they tied the second wrist. The flashing red and blue lit up the garage windows like Christmas. My son swore. Dana dropped the folder. And I sat very still as the front door burst open and voices yelled, and my son, the boy I once held through a fevered night when he was 3, was slammed against the garage wall and cuffed. The officer asked if I was all right. I said, "I am now." And I was. There was mold on the basement walls. Black, feathery streaks that crept up from the floor like bruises. The kind of mold you're not supposed to breathe. The kind they never cleaned. That's where they put me after Harold, my husband, passed. It didn't happen all at once. They didn't shove me down there with a suitcase and slam the door. No. It started politely, gently, even. "Just for a while, Mom," my son had said, glancing around their crowded living room with a furrowed brow, "until we get the renovations done." Renovations that never happened. That was 3 years ago. They moved me downstairs, promising to build out a proper suite. Like those in-law apartments on HGTV, Dana had chirped, already eyeing the upstairs for her craft studio. I didn't argue. I was still in mourning. And hope? It's a slow thing to die. At first, I tried to make it livable. I brought down a lamp, pinned up a few old photographs, tried to pretend it was temporary. But the air was always damp. The light dim. The mattress sagged. They never did insulate the ceiling, so I heard every footstep, every slammed cupboard, every fight. Sometimes I heard them laugh, but never with me. Dana had a way of forgetting I existed. She would walk past the basement door with her high heels clacking on the tile, yelling into her phone, complaining about the dead weight in the house. Harold used to call me his anchor. They made me feel like ballast. It wasn't just the basement. It was everything. A cold shoulder here. A missed meal there. A birthday unmentioned. A thank you left unsaid. Little things, but constant. Like a slow leak in the roof that eventually rots the whole house. I learned not to come up without knocking. I learned not to speak unless spoken to. I learned to take what was given and smile like it was enough. They had ways of reminding me when I forgot. "Did you take a shower today?" Dana would say, sniffing the air as if I were a stray dog. "You shouldn't watch the news," my son once told me, switching the channel without asking. "It just upsets you." And then there was the medication. "You don't need the brand name," Dana said. "We're switching you to generics. Cheaper." I tried to explain they made me dizzy. She rolled her eyes. "We're doing what's best for you." Always that phrase, best for me. Best, apparently, meant a single 40-watt bulb, a cement floor, and a space heater I had to turn off at night to keep the circuit from blowing. I was never asked if I was warm, but even in the basement, you notice things. I noticed when my bank card stopped working. "We just moved your account into joint management for convenience," Dana said. I noticed when the mail stopped coming to me. "We'll take care of anything important, Mom." I noticed when they stopped letting me sign for my own prescriptions. "You're just forgetful lately." And I noticed the whispers. Whispers behind doors. Whispers about liabilities and estate planning. Whispers about the house. That house, my house, was bought with Harold's pension and my seamstress income. We paid off the mortgage together in the fall of '94 and toasted with lemonade on the porch. They didn't build it. They didn't earn it. But they believed it was already theirs. One Sunday afternoon, I came upstairs. I wasn't supposed to. but the heater had failed again, and my fingers were going numb. I stood in the hallway, unsure if I should knock. That's when I heard them. "It's not enough she's here rent-free, now she wants a say in the bills?" Dana's voice was sharp. "I'm just saying we should wait until after the papers go through," my son replied. Papers. I pressed closer. "She won't even notice. She barely understands what's what anymore. We'll tell her it's for taxes." Then silence. And then something that broke whatever thread had held me quiet all these years. "She owes us. For everything." I backed down the stairs, slowly. The cold didn't feel as cold after that. That night, I unlocked the old trunk I'd kept hidden under the cot. Inside were Harold's records, some faded deeds, and a copy, notarized, of our living trust. I'd made changes to it last year, after a chat with a woman at the senior center who'd gone through something similar. She said, "You want to die in your own bed, not someone else's basement." So I made arrangements. Quietly. The house was no longer in both our names. It was in mine alone. And now, after last Monday's visit to my lawyer, it was owned by a trust. Irrevocable. Bulletproof. Not even they could touch it, no matter what they tricked me into signing. I remembered sitting in Francis's office, watching him slide the papers across the desk. "You're sure?" he asked. I nodded. "I don't trust them anymore." He didn't ask why. I think he saw it in my eyes. 3 days later, they brought down the power of attorney form. Dana smiled sweetly and said it was for medical decisions. I told her I needed time to think. That was the last time I was allowed upstairs. The night they dragged me into the garage, I already knew what they wanted. What they didn't know was they were too late. When the officers took them away, they didn't speak. Not to me, not to each other. Dana screamed at the police, of course. Called it a misunderstanding, said I was confused. But the body cam footage said otherwise. So did the smell of gasoline. So did the bruises on my wrists. The paramedic asked if I needed the ER. I said no, just air and shoes. They brought me upstairs. For the first time in 3 years, I stepped over my own threshold. The kitchen was still yellow, like Harold painted it. I could see my reflection in the microwave door. The woman staring back looked tired, but her eyes were clear. And finally, awake. The first time I realized they'd stopped calling me Mom, I was standing at the sink, rinsing out their cereal bowls. That was 2 summers ago. "Ask her where the mail is," Dana had said. Her, not Mom, not Ma. Just that small, sharp pronoun, like a paper cut you don't feel until later. After that, it became a pattern. She wants the thermostat higher. She already ate. She's in the basement. I became a ghost with working hands, a resident without rights, a woman-shaped service provider who answered to footsteps, not names. They stopped seeing me, so I started seeing myself again. I used to sew. Not for money, though I did that too when Harold's hours got cut. But I sewed because it made me feel capable, like I could take scraps and make something whole. My hands weren't as steady now, but I still kept my old singer in the basement, wrapped in a blanket. I repaired their curtains when Dana's cats shredded them. I hemmed my son's work pants when he gained weight and wouldn't admit it. Never a thank you. Just a new pile of fabric in the corner, as if I were a machine waiting to be refueled. I never said no. That was my sin. You don't see the moment it shifts. When love becomes obligation, and then obligation becomes burden. It happens slow. They start by making decisions without you. Little ones at first. What to eat, what to watch, where to put your things. Then they decide your opinions are old-fashioned. Then your memory is not reliable. Then your space is too much. Then one day, you realize the mail doesn't have your name on it anymore, and your bedroom has no lock. I kept a notebook. Not for revenge, at first, just to remember. Every medication change, every bank withdrawal I hadn't authorized, every accidental overdraft, every skipped meal, every time Dana forgot to pick up my prescription, every time they left me at home during holidays, because it's easier, Mom, you understand. I wrote it all down, because remembering became an act of survival. They wanted me to forget. That was the goal. To confuse me, wear me down, strip me of confidence until I'd sign anything just to be included again. But memory is what saved me. Harold once told me, people don't change. They just drop the mask when they think you won't fight back. I didn't want to believe that, not about my son, but Harold was rarely wrong. The night before they tied me up, I was in the basement folding laundry. Mine and theirs. Always theirs. I had a little table down there, splintered wood, barely level. On it was a stack of bills they left for me to handle. Their electricity, their water, their car insurance, all paid from my account. They'd put me on everything for convenience. They called it helping. I called it theft. I sat at that table staring at the envelopes and suddenly thought, this is not my life. This is not a life at all. That was the night I moved the documents, the deed, the trust papers, the copies of every unauthorized withdrawal. I put them in a sealed envelope and walked across the backyard in the dark. Next door lived Myra, my old friend. 83, sharp as a pin, with a cranky dachshund and a memory like a courthouse clerk. I told her simply, keep these safe. If something happens to me, anything, give them to Officer Green. She nodded once, didn't ask a single question. She knew. Women our age know when something's wrong. I think Dana sensed something that day. She brought me breakfast, toast, burnt, and watched me too long while I ate. Then she smiled and said, "You're looking well." Not kind, not loving. More like a vet checking a dog's strength before putting it down. That night, she told my son they couldn't wait much longer. She didn't whisper it. They thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I never knew how much strength I had left until they took me into that garage. You'd think the scariest part was the gasoline. It wasn't. It was the look on my son's face, a mix of pity and entitlement. As if he believed he was owed my compliance. As if I owed him the roof over his head, the money in my accounts, the silence. That look was worse than the cold, worse than the cords, worse than Dana's voice. That look said, "You are nothing unless we allow it." But I am not nothing. I was never nothing. I fed that boy with my hands. I held him through croup and chickenpox. I stitched his pants for school and wrote his college essays when he panicked the night before deadlines. And when his wife lost her job, I covered their mortgage for 6 months. Every single time, I told myself, it's what mothers do. But real mothers do not raise sons who tie their mothers to chairs. And real sons do not look at their mothers like strangers. So now I sit here, in my kitchen, in my chair, sipping tea from my blue-rimmed cup. Upstairs is mine again. Downstairs is empty. The officers told me I could file for a protective order. I said I'd think about it. What I haven't told them yet, what I'm not ready to say aloud, is that I already filed something far more permanent. Tomorrow, My lawyer will deliver a notice to their holding cell. It will inform them that the house is no longer under their name, influence, or reach. It will inform them they have 30 days to remove their belongings from the property, under police supervision. And then it will inform them that the woman they thought was helpless just evicted them from her life, not out of spite, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. A word they never taught their children, but one I still remember. The first thing I noticed when they dragged me into the garage was the smell. Not the gasoline. That came later. It was the scent of oil-stained concrete and old rage, baked into the floor like a stain no mop could lift. The second thing was the silence. Even as they moved around me, tying, threatening, posturing, they didn't speak to each other. Just looks. A nod here, a grimace there. Like soldiers in a battle they thought they'd already won. Dana was the one who pulled the rope tight around my wrist. Her nails were painted a high gloss red, the kind of red that meant control, not fashion. "You'll sign," she said. And I didn't answer. I watched my son, fiddle with the folder like a schoolboy who hadn't done his homework. He held the pen between his fingers, but he didn't offer it to me. Not yet. Because they were still waiting for me to cry. They wanted to see me beg. But I didn't. I sat still, cold seeping up through the soles of my feet, and looked them both in the eyes. "You think this is going to work?" I asked quietly. Dana tilted her head, her lip twitching. "We're not asking, Laura." Ah, there it was. Not Mom. Not Ma. Not even her. Just Laura. The last mask dropped. He stepped closer then. My son. The man I'd once rocked to sleep in a trailer park in Arkansas when we couldn't afford formula and I watered down powdered milk. He looked taller in that moment, but smaller somehow, as if cruelty had hollowed him out. "You're not well," he said. A script. Memorized. Hollow. "You've been forgetting things. The bills. The mail. You left the stove on last week." Lie. Dana nodded, stepping behind me. Her voice was a practiced mix of pity and threat. "This is just a precaution. If you really love us, you'll do this." Ah, love. Love. The leash they'd always used to pull me along. Love. The word they weaponized every time they needed something signed, bought, covered, forgiven. "If you love us, you'll sign." I looked at the paper again. Power of attorney. Control over medical, financial, and legal decisions. Full access. No oversight. No limits. "You're trying to make me disappear," I said, my voice like gravel. He blinked. "No, you want the house, the rest of the savings. My silence." I turned to Dana. "And you're hoping I'll be too scared to say no." She stepped forward with the pen. The garage was suddenly too still. That's when I felt it. The pressure of the button taped under my wrist. I'd wrapped it there earlier that night. It was an old trick I'd learned from Myra's niece, who worked in a care home. Always keep your panic button where they can't see it. Always press it before it's too late. I pressed it and waited. "You're stalling," Dana snapped. I smiled. "You're sweating." She flinched. That's when the first flash of red and blue lit up the corner of the garage window. Silent at first, like a warning. My son turned toward the light. He opened his mouth, and then the sirens wailed, loud, unapologetic. Close. Dana backed away from me. "Did you?" She started, but never finished. The front door slammed open. Boots, voices, flashlights. My son raised his hands too late, and I, still tied to the chair, closed my eyes and exhaled. I wasn't saved by luck. I was saved by preparation. The officers cut the cords. The medic checked my wrists. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I looked at my son, now sitting on the cold garage floor, handcuffed, his wife swearing at a sergeant. And I said, yes, not out of revenge. But because sometimes the only way to end a war is to stop pretending there wasn't one. By the time the sun rose, I was home again, not in the basement, not as a guest, not as a burden. Home, in my own bed, in my own name. And they were in a cell where silence finally belonged to them. They didn't know I still had the papers. That's the part that makes me smile now. Not from pettiness, but from clarity. Because they were so sure I'd forgotten, so confident I was lost in fog, that I'd given up tracking what was mine. But I hadn't. The papers were where they'd always been, in the kitchen drawer, beneath the dish towels, sealed in a blue folder marked coupons. Inside, the deed in my name, the updated trust agreement, a notarized letter from my lawyer, copies of every check I'd written for their mortgage, car, bills, every loan that was never repaid, every promise broken. I kept it all. Not because I planned for war, but because I never trusted peace. It started 2 years ago when Dana tried to refinance the house to get better rates. She sat me down at the dining table, the one I'd bought at a thrift store and refinished with my own hands, and laid out a stack of papers like I was a child with crayons. "Just sign here," she said. "It's a co-signature. Nothing changes." But something in her eyes told me otherwise, so I didn't sign. That night, she told my son I was starting to slip. I heard them from the basement vent. She said I was getting paranoid and making it hard to manage things. The next week, my son came downstairs with a list of medications we needed to talk about. They stopped calling me Mom shortly after. So I made an appointment with a lawyer, not one they knew. A man named Samuel Graves, who wore tweed jackets and let me speak without interruption. I brought everything I had, the old documents, the bank statements, even the Post-it notes where I'd scribbled down things Dana said when she didn't think I was listening. He read them quietly, then looked up and said, "Mrs. Bennett, do you want to protect yourself or punish them?" I said, "I want to be safe." He nodded. So we restructured the trust, removed my son as medical proxy, filed paperwork to secure the house as a protected asset under my sole authority. And we did it quietly, because I knew if they saw it coming, they'd just find another way. When I came home that day, the living room was full of catalogs. Dana was picking out new countertops. My son was calculating remodeling costs on a spreadsheet. "I thought we agreed," he said, waving a form I'd left unsigned. That was when I told him, gently but firmly, that the house was no longer under joint interest. His face changed. Just a flicker, but enough. "That wasn't the plan," he said. Whose plan, I wondered. Certainly not mine. They backed off after that. For a while. No more talk of refinancing. No more papers slipped under my door. Dana even brought me coffee one morning and smiled. Tight-lipped and wrong. But kindness, when it's a mask, is thinner than paper. It was never about the house alone. It was about control. A month later, the power was shut off in the basement. "Must have been a mix-up," Dana said, twirling her phone. "You should have told us the light wasn't working." I asked if she'd disconnected it from the main. She laughed. Then came the missing medication. Then came the misplaced mail. Then came the suggestion that maybe I'd be better off in a community. You'd have friends, my son said. Structure, meals. I asked if they were going to visit. They didn't answer. That's when I bought the safe. It wasn't big, just enough to hold the folder, my ID, and a flash drive with every scanned document. I hid it in the closet behind the vacuum, covered in old holiday decorations. They never looked there. Why would they? I was just the old woman in the basement. The night they brought the gasoline and the rope, I thought, this is the end of pretending. But I wasn't afraid. Because everything they wanted, I'd already taken back. They thought the folder was still in the drawer. They didn't know about the safe. They didn't know about the second copy with Myra. And they sure as hell didn't know the house they stood in belonged only to me. In writing, in law, in full. When the officers asked if I had any documents to support my story, I didn't hesitate. I opened the closet, pulled down the box labeled Christmas wreath, rolled back the ribbon, and handed over the truth. Neat. Signed. Dated. I knew they'd come for it, I said. The young officer stared at me like I'd handed him a grenade. Ma'am, he said, this changes everything. Yes, I thought, it does. He only called when he wanted something, never to say hello, never to ask how I was sleeping or if the pills were working or if I was warm in the basement. Just, hey Ma, do you have the login for the water bill? Or, you mind watching the cats? Dana's got a conference. Or worse, silence, followed by Dana's voice pretending she was doing me a favor. But that week, the week before the garage, he called me twice, and both times he was polite. Too polite. The first call came on a Tuesday morning while I was folding laundry. I let it ring 3 times before answering, just to remind myself I could. Hey, Ma, he said, voice light like he hadn't skipped my birthday again. You doing okay down there? Down there. As if I were in a coal mine. I'm managing, I replied. Is something wrong? No, he chuckled. Just checking in. Wanted to see how you were holding up with the heat. Summer's creeping in, huh? It was March. I said nothing. The second call came Friday night. He asked if I needed anything from the store. Which store? He didn't say. They hadn't bought me groceries in 6 months. I declined. Well, listen, he said, tone shifting into what I'd come to recognize as the setup. Dana and I have been talking. We were thinking, just for simplicity, maybe we could streamline the way things are handled. Bills and all that. I waited. I mean, you've been dealing with so much, and you shouldn't have to worry about paperwork. That's what we're here for. Ah, we. That old chorus. I'll think about it, I said. He was quiet for a second too long. Then, it's just paperwork, Ma. No big deal. But it was. It always is. The truth is, my son stopped being my son the day he married Dana. Not because she was a bad woman. No, bad is too easy. She was worse. Calculated, pleasant, with just enough charm to make you doubt yourself when she took something from you. The first year they moved in, she cried when her mother fell ill. I sat with her in the kitchen, made her tea, rubbed her back. That same month, she emptied half my linen closet and called it decluttering. The next year, she asked for a loan to cover her certification course. When I said I'd need it in writing, she stopped bringing me tea. I don't blame her alone. My son let it happen. He always let things happen. Even as a boy, he'd lie to avoid conflict. If he broke something, it was the wind. If he got caught skipping school, he'd say, I didn't want you to worry. Worry was all I ever did, especially after Harold died. That first year, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table every night, watching the porch light blink. hoping he'd walk through the door and tell me it was all a mistake. My son moved in to help. It took 6 months for the basement to become mine and the mortgage to become his. I remember the moment I realized he was ashamed of me. He'd invited co-workers over for a barbecue. I came upstairs to offer iced tea. He looked at me like I was a mess. Dana smiled tight and said, "Oh, we didn't tell you we had guests?" I nodded, went back downstairs. Later, I found the half-full pitcher still sweating on the counter. No one touched it. That shame grew over time. Quiet. Corrosive. He stopped inviting me to work events. Said I'd be bored. He stopped asking me for advice. Said I wouldn't understand. Then he started asking for money again. Said it was temporary. It always was. Until it wasn't. The last Christmas we spent under the same roof, I left a wrapped box on their bed. Inside was a check for $5,000. Not because I wanted to give it, but because I thought maybe it would soften them. The next morning, there was no thank you. Only Dana complaining that the house smelled like old people after the candles I lit. I knew then I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a transaction. But transactions have terms, and terms can be broken. Which is why I called Mr. Graves again the Monday before the garage. "I want to change the emergency contact," I told him. "From your son?" he asked gently. "Yes, from both of them." He didn't ask why, just said, "Understood." When the police came, they asked if there was anyone I wanted to call. I said yes, and gave them Eloise's number, my niece's daughter, who calls every Sunday just to hear my voice. My son and Dana thought I was a fading asset, but I'm a ledger they never finished reading, and now the balance has shifted. I don't remember buying the red folder. Probably picked it up at the dollar store, back when they still called it that. It wasn't fancy, just a cheap plastic thing with 2 pockets and no spine. But I liked the color. It reminded me of autumn, of ripe tomatoes, of the coat I wore the day Harold proposed. That red folder became my ledger. It lived in the second drawer of the buffet cabinet, under the pot holders I hadn't used in years. No one looked there. They didn't think I cooked anymore. They didn't think I did anything anymore. But I did. Every time Dana handed me a receipt and said, "Just pay it, would you?" I made a copy and put it in the red folder. Every time my son borrowed from my savings, I wrote it down, date and amount. Every copay, every extra grocery run, every favor they forgot to repay. Logged, printed, and filed. It wasn't about revenge. Not then. It was about keeping a record of how fast love eroded when it was weighed down by expectation. The bank lady knew something was wrong. Her name was Charlotte. Young, with neat hair and too much eyeliner. The kind who tries to make eye contact with people like me just a second too long. She'd helped me reset my PIN one afternoon and glanced at the screen. "You've got a lot of linked accounts," she said carefully. "Want to review any of those today?" I didn't answer right away. She clicked once, twice. Power bill, phone, insurance, 2 auto payments to Greenfield Veterinary? I raised my eyebrows. They didn't even have a pet anymore. "Oh, and a standing transfer to..." She stopped. "Sorry, that's probably your family." It was, but not for much longer. That evening, I sat on the edge of my cot in the basement and pulled the red folder onto my lap. I went page by page. I tallied. I added. I stared. Over $70,000. That's how much I had given them, directly or through bills, since Harold died. And in return, a cot, a dark basement, and last week, a bruised wrist and the smell of gasoline. The next morning, I put the red folder in my purse and caught the early bus to town. I didn't tell them I was leaving. Dana would have insisted on dropping me off. My son would have asked why I needed a lawyer again. Didn't we already handle that, Ma? But I wasn't going to the lawyer. Not yet. First, I went to the bank. Charlotte smiled when she saw me. I'd like to make some changes, I said. And I did. I closed every auto payment. I froze the linked cards. I removed Dana as an authorized user. I printed the transfer history. Then I opened a new account. One with no online access. One only I could touch. And into it, I moved everything that mattered. Not just the money, the control. Then I went to see Mr. Graves. He read through the folder slowly. When he finished, he looked at me, hands folded. You want to press charges? I shook my head. Not yet. He nodded. But I do want to initiate eviction. Understood. And, I said, I want the trust to include a provision. What kind? That they get nothing. No inheritance, no access, not even a photograph. He didn't blink. I can write that. There's something freeing about the word no. It's sharp. Final. A full sentence like a door clicking shut. I'd said yes for so long, out of habit, guilt, fear, love. But now, the door was mine to close. Back home, I found Dana in the kitchen. She was on the phone, laughing. The fake kind of laugh she used with people she needed. She looked surprised to see me. You were out? She said, eyeing my purse. I was, I replied. She waited. I didn't explain. That was new. Later that night, my son knocked on the basement door. He didn't come down. He never liked the stairs. Hey, he said through the crack. Everything okay? Dana said you were out all day? I'm fine, I called back. Pause. You know, we should talk soon about the future. I smiled in the dark. We will. And we did. But not the way he expected. She always had the key. It was something we'd set up back when Harold was still alive, during one of those heavy winters when ice froze the car doors shut, and you started thinking about what might happen if one of you slipped on the steps. You never know, Myra had said. You could fall. Hit your head. You need someone who can check in. So I gave her a key. She gave me one in return. We never needed them. Until we did. That night, the night of the garage, Myra saw everything. She lives 2 doors down, with her fat terrier and her louder opinions. But she's got good eyesight for 83, and a nasty habit of looking out the window when she hears garage doors opening after midnight. She told me later, I saw Dana dragging something. I thought it was a rug. Then I realized it was you. Myra doesn't scare easily. She's the kind of woman who yells at teenagers for riding their bikes on the sidewalk. But that night, she paused. I thought, maybe it's a misunderstanding, she admitted. Maybe you'd ask them for help with something. Then she saw the chair. Then she saw the rope. And then she called 911. It wasn't the first time she'd been suspicious. Last summer, she'd asked me, carefully, in that way old women talk when they're trying to spare you the shame, if everything was all right in the house. You're looking thinner, she said. It's the heat, I lied. You're not in any trouble, are you? No, I said. But I wouldn't meet her eyes. She nodded. Didn't push. But a week later, she slipped a card into my mailbox. A lawyer's card. With a note. In case you ever want to talk to someone who isn't wearing a smile and hiding a knife. I never said thank you. I should have. The night of the garage, I pressed the panic button first. But Myra's call is what brought the squad cars faster. Because while dispatch hears from seniors all the time, alarms triggered by accident, confused reports, false starts. When someone else calls in a domestic disturbance and says the words, "elderly woman restrained," things move quicker. She told them what she saw. She stayed on the line, and when the officers arrived, she was already outside, in her robe and slippers, waiting. "That's her," she said, pointing to me through the open garage. "She's the one who owns the house." And when they tried to tell her it was a family matter, she didn't back down. "She's been living like a tenant in her own basement," she snapped. "And now they're trying to rob her." I was still in the chair when she stepped into the garage. "You all right, Laura?" she asked, her voice steady. I nodded. "Just tired." She nodded too, then turned to the officers. "Get her out of here. She's had enough." The irony was, they didn't even realize she had the key. While Dana was in the kitchen shredding lettuce and complaints, and my son was in the living room balancing the budget on my pension, Myra was slipping into the house once a month to check on me. I didn't always know it, but I'd find small things. My blankets folded a little neater, an extra granola bar tucked behind the tea, a post-it note that said, "Smile today," stuck to the mirror. She never signed them. She didn't have to. We understand each other, women like us. We've seen too many polite betrayals. After the arrest, when they took my son and Dana away, Myra stood beside me on the porch as I held the folder in my hands, the one she'd been guarding for me. "I hope you burn that garage down," she muttered. "No," I said. "I'm going to turn it into a greenhouse." She laughed, loud and proud. "That's even better." We sat on the porch until the sun came up. She poured us both coffee from a thermos she'd brought, black and bitter. "You did it," she said finally. "You didn't flinch." "I almost did, but you didn't." I looked at the window. "My hands still shake." She nodded. "They will, for a while. Then they stop. Then you remember what strong feels like." Before she left, she pressed something into my palm. Her key. "The locks will change," I said. "The house is mine now." "I know, but habits die hard." I looked at her. "You think they'll come back?" "Oh, they'll try," she said. "People like that always do, when the money runs out, when the shame wears off." "Then what?" She smiled. "Then you don't open the door." And I won't, because now I know who holds the keys. The dispatcher told me later. My call came in 7 minutes before Myra's. That means I pressed the panic button at exactly 12:14 a.m. I remember the moment. My son was pacing behind me, trying to stay calm, trying to look like this wasn't what it was. Dana hovered near the shelves, keeping her distance from the gasoline stain she'd poured too close to my feet. I couldn't move, could barely breathe, but I could feel the button, duct-taped under the armrest of the chair. The old porch chair Harold built, the one they thought was just another broken relic I wouldn't part with. They never checked underneath. They never looked. I pressed it during the pause, when Dana opened the folder and turned the page, when my son sighed like a man disappointed in his dog, when they both turned away, just for a second. Click. It was small, soft, no louder than a fingernail against fabric. But it was the loudest sound I'd made in years. The dispatcher called back within 60 seconds. I couldn't answer. That's when the system did what it was meant to do. Triggered a silent alert, prioritized as probable duress. The police were dispatched at 12:16 a.m. But it was Myra's voice, 4 minutes later, that put urgency in their wheels. The first officer to step into the garage was young, barely older than my granddaughter. He had kind eyes, even though his hand hovered near his holster when he saw the setup. "Ma'am," he said, "are you hurt?" I didn't speak at first. Dana did. "This is all a misunderstanding." He cut her off. "Ma'am, I'm talking to the woman tied to the chair." I looked at him and said, as clearly as I could, "They tried to force me to sign over my house." He glanced at the cord, the spilled gasoline, the open folder. Then he looked at my son. "Sir, step back and put your hands where I can see them." Things moved fast after that. Dana argued. My son tried to explain. But there was body cam footage. There was gasoline. There were bruises on my wrists and a panic button still pressed into the wood. I saw it in their faces. That slow, sickening realization. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be buried under polite smiles and family names. At the station, I sat in a beige room with a styrofoam cup of water and an officer named Hernandez. She was calm, methodical, wrote everything down. "Did they ever threaten you before?" "No." "Did you feel unsafe in the home?" "I felt unwelcome." "Did you ever tell anyone?" I paused. "No, but I left a note." She looked up. "What kind of note?" It was in the pantry, behind the old flour tin, a one-page letter, handwritten, dated 6 weeks ago. I wrote it after they switched my pills without telling me. "If anything happens to me," I'd started. "It wasn't an accident." I listed dates, names, bank details. I wrote about the power being shut off in the basement, about the freezer where they hid my meals so I couldn't reach them without bending. I signed it in blue ink. Officer Hernandez sent someone to retrieve it. "Back in the room," she said quietly. "You're not the first." I looked at her. She nodded. "We see more of this than you think. Quiet control, financial abuse, medical neglect." She paused. "But very few people call." I folded my hands in my lap. Why not? Because they're afraid no one will believe them. I understood. I'd been afraid of the same thing. That they'd say I was confused, that my bruises were from a fall, that I'd forgotten where I left the bills. But the truth had weight now. In paper, in fingerprints, in footage. They let me go home just after 4 a.m., not to the basement, to my bedroom, my bed, my house. The front door had been left open in the rush. I closed it myself, turned the deadbolt, and stood for a long time, staring at the quiet hallway. No voices above, no steps on the ceiling, no Donna, no sun, just me, and silence. The kind you earn. The officer didn't believe me. Not at first. It was in the way he glanced at the papers I handed him, then back at my face like I was speaking a language just beyond his grasp. Not hostile, not rude. Just that quiet, dangerous skepticism reserved for women who've lived too long and speak too calmly. "This is a serious accusation," he said. "I'm aware," I replied. I handed him the deed, then the trust papers, then the folder of bank statements, and a list of every transaction with my name on it and someone else's benefit attached. He didn't speak for a full minute. Then, "You kept all this?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Since the first time they told me I didn't need to worry about the bills." I watched his expression change, slowly, like clouds shifting in late afternoon. He'd walked in thinking I was some confused old woman filing a grudge report. Now he saw me, not as a victim, as a witness. "They tied you up?" he asked, voice lower now. "Yes." "And poured gasoline?" "Yes." "And tried to force you to sign?" "Yes." He sat back, Do you want to press charges? I already did, I said. When I didn't sign. After that, everything became very official. They took photographs of my wrists, collected the spilled gasoline as evidence, marked the chair with tags like it was some sacred crime scene. And it was. It was the altar where my family thought they could sacrifice me to get the life they thought they deserved. But I didn't burn. Back home, I found myself staring at the couch. It still had the same dent where my son always sat. A little slouch to the left. The same armrest he'd leaned against when he told me they were taking over the bills, as if I hadn't paid them for 40 years. As if the roof above his head was his to claim. I sat in his spot, just once, not to claim it, to erase it. The court date was set within the week. Expedited, they said, due to the nature of the arrest. Dana's lawyer filed for bail. The judge denied it. My son didn't speak during the hearing. I did. Short and simple. I gave them everything, I said. And when that wasn't enough, they came for what was left. The judge nodded, once. Not sympathy, not pity, recognition. They were charged with attempted coercion, elder abuse, unlawful restraint. The prosecutor offered a plea deal. They declined. Still thought they could talk their way out of it. Still thought I'd change my mind. Still thought I was the same woman who used to leave birthday checks on their nightstand and say nothing when they forgot to say thank you. They didn't know I'd changed my locks. They didn't know I'd changed my will. They didn't know I'd changed me. The day after the hearing, Officer Hernandez stopped by. She brought a copy of the final report. "It's enough," she said. "More than enough." I nodded. She lingered. "You did the right thing." It didn't feel like it. It never does. After she left, I walked through the house room by room, not to check for dust, not to organize, just to look. The photos on the wall, the chipped mug in the sink, the thin crack in the tile near the back door. Things I'd stopped noticing when I was surviving. Now I was living. And the house, my house, felt like mine again. Not because the name was on the deed, but because I no longer had to apologize for taking up space in it. That night, I took the red folder and placed it in the safe. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it was no longer for defense. It was proof of who I was, of what I'd come through, of what I'd refused to become. They never thought I'd go to court. I wasn't supposed to. I was supposed to be too tired, too confused, too embarrassed to speak in front of a judge. They thought I'd sit in the hallway, shivering in my coat, while lawyers in polished shoes made decisions about my life. But I didn't sit in the hallway. I stood behind the microphone, and when they called my name, I stepped forward. Steady, slow, but without hesitation. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Dana sat 2 tables away, her hair too smooth, her dress too bright, like she thought she could still charm her way out of what she did. My son wouldn't look at me. He kept his hands folded in front of him, like a boy waiting to be scolded. I looked at both of them, and for the first time in years, I felt nothing that resembled family. The judge asked me to speak. I cleared my throat. No papers, no rehearsed lines, just the truth. I was tied to a chair in my own garage, I said, by the 2 people I spent my life protecting. I heard someone shift in the gallery. I gave them food when they couldn't buy groceries. I paid bills when they were drowning in credit. I let them move into my home because I believed in second chances. I paused. I believed they loved me. The judge didn't interrupt, nor did he flinch when I said what came next. But what they wanted wasn't love. It was control. And when I didn't give them more, they tried to take it by force. I saw Dana shake her head, mouthing something to her lawyer. I didn't care, because the truth doesn't wait for permission, and I wasn't asking anymore. I don't need them to go to prison, I continued, but I need them out of my life. I need safety. I need silence. I need peace. I turned to the judge, and I need them to understand. I will not be erased. That was all. I stepped down, and the silence that followed was thicker than applause. Outside, the wind had picked up. September was crawling toward October. The air had a bite to it, like it remembered something you forgot to prepare for. Officer Hernandez met me on the courthouse steps. "You did well." I nodded. She waited a moment. "They're going to file appeals, you know." "They can file what they want," I said. She smiled. "You're not afraid?" I shook my head. I was. But fear only works if you think they still own part of you. They don't. Not the house, not the bank, not even the past. Because ownership isn't about paperwork. It's about who writes the story when it ends. And this was mine again. Back at home, I boiled water for tea and sat at the table with the sun coming through the window, warm across my knuckles. I opened the newspaper. Not for the stories, just for the quiet. Just because I could. And somewhere in the distance, maybe in the garage, maybe in my chest, something finally let go. Something heavy. Something I'd carried for too long. The letter came 2 weeks after the sentencing. Plain envelope. No return address. Careful handwriting, like someone afraid to press too hard. I knew it was from him before I opened it. A mother knows her child's weight on paper. He didn't apologize. Not directly. Just started with, "I don't know how it got this far." Then came a paragraph of explanations. Not excuses, but the kind of empty clarifications people give when they want to be forgiven without doing the work. He wrote about the bills, the stress, how Dana pushed too hard sometimes. He wrote, "I should have stopped it." He didn't write, "I'm sorry I tied you to a chair." The letter wasn't long. At the bottom, in smaller print than the rest, was one last sentence. "I hope someday we can talk." I folded the letter in half, then in quarters, then again until it was small enough to disappear into my palm. I didn't tear it, but I didn't keep it. It went into the fire with the rest of the dry leaves. The silence afterward felt like breath returning. For years, I'd lived in a state of almost comfortable, almost safe, almost loved. But silence has a sound, once you get used to it. It's the clink of a teacup, the whir of the heater switching on, the gentle scrape of a chair against wood. Life without apology. I began to rearrange the house. Not the furniture, the life inside it. I took down the framed photo of their wedding, not out of spite, just to make room for something else. Something honest. In its place, I hung a photo of me and Harold, taken on our last vacation. We're both wearing hats too big for our heads, grinning like fools, holding cones of melting ice cream. That photo had lived in a drawer for 15 years. Now it lives in the light. I turned the basement into a workshop. The cot went out to the curb. The heater was replaced with proper insulation. I added a second table, bought new thread, oiled my old sewing machine. It still worked. So did I. Neighbors stopped by. Some had heard the story. Bits of it anyway. They brought casseroles, flowers, long glances full of questions they didn't ask. Myra came with pie and a bottle of whiskey. She said we weren't allowed to open until the last leaf fell. "We're almost there," she said, winking. I started sleeping with the window open again. For years, I'd kept it shut, afraid of noise, of cold, of the unknown. But now I liked the breeze. It reminded me that air belongs to no one, not sons, not daughters-in-law, not fear. One night, I sat on the porch with a blanket and a notebook. I wrote my name at the top of the page, just my name, Laura Bennett. Then I wrote one sentence beneath it. I am still here. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't even good writing. But it was true. And truth is a kind of shelter when you've been without one long enough. The mail kept coming. So did the quiet. So did the peace. And so did I. Back into myself. Not all at once, but steadily, like breath, like tea cooling beside a sunlit window, like a woman reclaiming not just her home, but her voice. People assume that when something awful ends, relief comes rushing in to fill the empty space. But it doesn't. Not right away. What comes first is the quiet. The strange, disorienting quiet of not waiting for footsteps on the ceiling, or keys rattling in a lock that's no longer yours, or voices behind doors that used to open and close without knocking. For the first few days after the court ruling, I kept catching myself listening. I would freeze mid-step, mid-tea pour, mid-thought, listening for their sounds. But they were gone. Gone in the legal sense. Gone in the physical sense. And slowly, I started to understand they were gone in the emotional sense too. Not just out of the house. Out of me. I had to relearn small things. Like cooking, for one. Not with sadness, but with care. Not just throwing things in the microwave and calling it done, like they used to do for me, like I'd come to believe I deserved. Now I peeled carrots slowly, heated soup on the stove, toasted bread until golden, not black, set a plate, not just grabbed a paper napkin. It felt foolish at first, but no one's watching in your own kitchen. And sometimes, dignity starts with how you feed yourself. I found a routine. Mornings on the porch with my tea and the crossword. Afternoons in the basement. Now my workshop. Clean and warm. Evenings with a blanket and a book I'd already read, but forgotten just enough to enjoy again. I wasn't lonely. I was alone. It's not the same. Myra came by every Tuesday. She never stayed long. Said she didn't want to over-nurture, but she always brought something. Biscuits, old magazines, the news from her niece's divorce, a disaster, or gossip from the church book club. Once, she brought me a tin box and said, "For your next red folder." I told her I hoped I wouldn't need another. She said, "No one hopes to need one, but you plan for it anyway." She was right. She usually is. One Sunday, I walked the property line. It's something Harold used to do every spring, checking the edges, fixing the gate latch, making sure the world hadn't crept in uninvited. I hadn't done it in years. But that morning, with the sun still soft and the grass wet with dew, I pulled on my boots and walked the perimeter of the life I'd rebuilt. Past the hydrangeas. Past the little patch of earth I'd once tried to turn into a garden before they said it wasn't worth the trouble. It was worth it. Even the weeds were mine now. I found the old shed half collapsed behind the pine trees. It had been Dana's idea to use it for storage, but they'd never fixed the roof, and by now it was leaning like an old man with a bad hip. I should have been angry. Instead, I laughed. Loud, uncontrolled, real. Because even their carelessness had an end date now. I called a local contractor, asked him to tear the shed down and build a small greenhouse in its place. "I'm retired," he said, scratching his chin. I only take the jobs I want now. I said, that makes two of us. He agreed. We picked out polycarbonate panels and a cedar frame. It was finished by the end of the month. On the first morning, it stood complete. I opened the door and stood inside. The light warm around my shoulders, the air earthy and sweet. I didn't plant anything that day, just stood there, breathing. People still ask if I've heard from them. I haven't, and I don't expect to. Prison changes people, they say, but I don't need them to change. I need them to stay gone. My son wrote one more letter. This one I didn't open. I took it straight to the trash. No ceremony, no grief. Some things do not deserve another reading. I've started writing my own letters. To friends I'd lost touch with. To my cousin in Georgia. Even to the ladies at the senior center I used to avoid, afraid they'd ask why I always looked tired. They write back. Tell me about their gardens, their grandkids, their aching knees and quiet mornings. I tell them I'm learning to sew again, that I'm not cold anymore, that the house is mine again in more than just the legal sense. I don't talk about the garage unless someone asks, and even then, I don't tell the whole thing, just enough to let them know I got out, that I stayed, that I didn't disappear. Because sometimes the best ending isn't a rescue, it's a return, not to what was, but to what was meant. And now, when I sit on the porch and the wind rattles the trees, I don't flinch. I don't wait for voices upstairs, or footsteps, or the sound of my own name twisted into an order. There is no one above me now, only sky. The envelope was thick and cream-colored. My lawyer called it confirmation. I called it freedom. It arrived by courier just after noon, handed to me by a boy with freckles and a motorbike helmet under one arm. He didn't know what he was delivering, just another package on a Friday. But I knew. The moment I saw the seal on the corner, the courthouse stamp, embossed and cold, I felt it settle into my hands like a final stone placed atop a grave. I signed for it, took it inside, boiled the kettle, and opened it at the table where Dana once told me I'd feel better if I'd just stopped worrying. The judgment was brief. 2 pages, double-spaced, full of language that only people like Mr. Graves understand fully. But the meaning was clear enough. All rights of occupancy, ownership, access, and claim to the property known as 114 Meadow Lane are hereafter and irrevocably assigned to Laura J. Bennett as sole legal owner. No appeal, no contest, no loophole, just mine. I traced the edge of the paper with my fingertip. It had weight. Not the kind you feel in grams or ounces, but the kind that presses against your lungs and says, you can breathe now. I set the paper on the table and just looked at it. Not crying, not shaking, just still. Still in the way you are when a long storm finally passes and you can hear the world again. Later that afternoon, I walked through every room, not to check, not to admire, but to own, not in pride, in presence. There was no dust upstairs. I kept cleaning, even when they told me not to. There were still a few marks on the floor where the chair had scraped in the garage. I didn't buff them out. Some things deserve to stay, to remind you what you walked through barefoot, silent, unthanked. I hung one more photo. It wasn't new, just one I'd hidden away. Me, holding my son at 4 months old, both of us squinting in the sunlight. His head on my shoulder, my hand holding his like it was something precious. Because it was. For a long time, I thought taking that photo down meant I was healing. Now I realize leaving it up is what healing really looks like. You don't erase the love. You just stop letting it punish you. Myra brought champagne that night. Not the good kind. The fizzy, oversweet bottle from the corner store with a plastic cork and a crooked label. She said, "We're toasting anyway." I poured 2 glasses. We sat on the porch in the good chairs. "Feels different," she said. "It is," I said. She sipped. "They ever reach out again?" "Not since the last letter." "You open it?" "No." "Good." We drank. Around the second glass, she looked at me sideways. "You going to change the will?" "I already did." She raised her eyebrows. "Oh?" "Everything goes to the women's shelter," I said. "And a scholarship, for girls like me. Ones who lost time trying to be good." Myra nodded. "That's better than any revenge." "It's not revenge." "No, it's rebalancing." The stars came out as we finished the bottle. The porch light hummed. I wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders. "I was afraid I'd feel sad," I said quietly. "Do you?" "No." "What do you feel?" I thought for a long time. "Empty," I said. "But in a clean way. Like a room that used to be cluttered, and now it's just waiting for what you choose to put in it." Myra smiled. "That's the best kind of empty." When she left, I stood at the door for a while, not waiting, just choosing when to go in, because now every room was mine, in title, in memory, in silence. Even the garage, especially the garage. I slept upstairs that night, with the window open, with the air cool and moving, with no locks on the inside of my door, because no one was coming. And if they ever tried, they'd find it wasn't just the house that had changed. It was the woman in it. The last room I reclaimed was the attic. It wasn't locked, just forgotten. Dust thick on the stairs, boxes stacked like sediment from a life too long postponed. I hadn't been up there in years. Dana once said it was a fire hazard, and my son said he'd get around to it eventually. He never did, like most things he promised. I climbed the steps slowly, one hand on the rail, the other gripping a flashlight, even though daylight was spilling through the cracks. The air was stale, sweet with old paper and mothballs, and something else, that particular scent of time. Not rot, not decay, just stillness. The kind you don't notice until it breaks. I found things I'd forgotten I owned. Harold's radio, a baby quilt I'd sewn in '78, a box of old receipts tied with twine labeled just in case, a coat that still smelled faintly of cedar and October. In the corner, a small metal trunk. Inside, letters from my sister, birthday cards from people long gone, and a notebook with my name in cursive on the first page. My handwriting, younger, rounder, a different woman. I sat on the floor and opened it. The first line read, "Things I will never say out loud." I read every page. And with each one, I remembered a version of myself I thought had been erased. The girl who wrote poems in margins, who once dreamed of owning a bookstore, who believed kindness would always be returned. I cried, not for grief, for gratitude, because she was still in there, buried under years of compromise and silence, waiting, and now she had space to breathe again. I spent the rest of the afternoon clearing the attic, not to get rid of the past, to make room for the future. The house was quiet that night, not empty, not echoing, just settled, like it had exhaled, finally allowed to be a home again, not a holding cell. I made a cup of tea and stood in the doorway of every room one last time, not to check, not to protect, but to witness. The light falling across the kitchen tile, the corner of the couch where I now read instead of worry, the basement door which no longer locks from the outside. The garage, swept clean, waiting for soil and seedlings. Every room spoke the same thing. You survived. Not just the night in the chair, not just the courtroom, not just the 1,000 small humiliations that came before, but the worst part, the part where you believe this is all you're worth. I don't believe that anymore. Because the truth is, people can love you and still try to break you. People can say family and still mean ownership. People can smile as they close the cage. But survival is not just staying alive. It's staying yours. And if you are reading this, if any part of this story feels like a bruise under your own skin, I need you to hear me now. You are not too late. You are not too old. You are not too broken. You are not imagining it. If you are afraid in your own home, if your voice gets smaller around people who say they love you, if you've stopped calling yourself by your own name, there is still time to take it back, to gather the papers, the proof, the strength, to call the lawyer, to tell the neighbor, to write the letter, to keep the folder, to press the button, because no one is coming to rescue you. But that's not the tragedy, that's the power. Because when you save yourself, when you stand up in the middle of the burning room and say, no, when you look at someone who called you helpless and say, not anymore, when you lock the door behind them and say, this house, this name, this life, it's mine again, that's not just survival, that's victory. So if this meant something to you, share it with someone quiet, someone tired, someone who's starting to believe they have to wait until someone else gives them permission to live. They don't, and neither do you. Follow. Comment. Tell me you're still here, because I am, and I always will be.